G'day from Australia. My name is Ashley Davis and welcome to my coding live stream. These sessions are recorded live, but I put them on YouTube later for you to watch at any time. We are building the Photosphere application while I do my best to tell you my thinking process while I'm coding. Please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. You can see my handle on the screen. Before we start coding, I'll do a tradition that we have here in Australia. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm broadcasting. I'd also like to pay my respect to elders past and present. Okay, so as you know by now, I'm doing these live streams to support my book, Rapid Fullstack Development. You can find it at rapidfullstackdevelopment.com. The first chapter is available for free to read online. Today's live stream is a part of an ongoing series of live streams that you can find on my YouTube channel, Code Capers. If you look under playlists, find Rapid Fullstack Development, click View Playlist, and you can see all the previous sessions in the live stream series leading up to today. All the code that I'm writing as part of these live streams is available on GitHub. Just look for the Rapid Fullstack Development page on GitHub and you can find a whole bunch of repos there that we've been developing and prototyping and doing test-driven development and all sorts of stuff through this series. Today, we're continuing to work on the Photo Gallery TDD live stream repo. Please feel free to grab this and try it out for yourself. So I'm picking up today exactly where I left off in the last session, resuming test-driven development for the layout algorithm for Photosphere's Photo Gallery. The first thing I like to do when I come back to any kind of coding session is run my tests and just see what state I left it in last time. Usually I like to leave my tests in a working state, although sometimes I leave a failing test just to remind myself what I'm supposed to be doing in the next session. But we're starting with all passing tests at the moment. There are some loose ends from the last session that you might remember that I need to kind of follow up on first today. So let's look at those first. I'm just opening Visual Studio Code here. Now, the first thing was that I was a little bit overly verbose in some of my testing expectations here. So these are tests running under Jest. So I was basically checking that these widths and these heights here are between a certain small amount of an expected value, because you can't say one floating point number is exactly equal to another floating point number because of floating point precision issues. I'll come back to that in a moment. I've got a good resource if you want to understand more about that. You have to do it like this. You have to say that the number is greater than some number, minus a small amount, or that it's less than a number, plus some small amount here. So you can see these epsilon values. Now, I did that because I wasn't sure actually what to use. I used to use a function in Mocha called close to, and I'll show you that in the docs in a second. I thought there must be a similar thing in Jest, but I had never needed to use it before, and I didn't know what it was. So I just went with what I knew just to keep the live stream going. But between live streams, I've done a little bit more research on that, and so I do know what to use now. Let me show you that. So I'm just going to switch over to the docs, which I already had open. So I went back to a previous project just to remind myself how I'd done it, and that was using Mocha with this chai assertion library, and it was the close to function that I was using. I kind of knew what I needed to Google for now, like I think what I was looking for in the last session was almost, not close to, something like that. It wasn't quite right. So I Googled for close to for Jest, and I hit the Jest documentations, and I came up with to be close to. That's obviously what I want to use, that one number is close to another number. So let's make our code use that. It's handy when you've got some documentation like this to have the documentation open side by side with the code that you're editing. So I think I can replace these two lines here basically with the one line. So let's just put that above. So I want the width to be close to the original width. So this is what I'm saying here is I want the computed width that my layout algorithm is computing to be close to the original width. Because on this item in the second row, I expect that this is not going to be stretched to the extent of the photo gallery. If this isn't making any sense to you, I would encourage you to watch the previous video to work out how I got to this point. I want to do this exact same thing here, but with height. And this makes all these other expectations here redundant. They're unnecessary, so I delete them. And hopefully, I haven't broken anything. Hopefully my tests will work now, just with that small refactor. Cool, all still working. So that's a commit. My code is working. I would normally self-review here, but I'm pretty sure that I got it right. Let me just show you that anyway. So git diff is what you should do. Oops, I added it, that didn't work. I'll do that next time. Let's just get this in. This is a small improvement. More expressive testing. Doesn't quite capture it, but that'll do. Okay, so that's it. Now, the other thing I noticed in the last session, let me let me go into my other terminal here, and I'll actually start the dev server. And we'll actually have a look at where the web page got to visually. So I'm just running npm start here to start the Parcel dev server. Oh yeah, before we go on to that, I will just show you an interesting resource for learning about floating point numbers that I picked up earlier. If you're wondering, why I had to do that test the way that I did it, or that expectation that I couldn't test one floating point number exactly against another floating point number, I have to do this weird thing where I say the floating point number is close to another number. There's an issue with floating point numbers, a precision issue that happens in every programming language. It's not just JavaScript. It's in Python. It's in C++. It's anything that conforms to this IEEE floating point standard. Google this. Whatever your computer scientists should know about floating point arithmetic. If you want to understand why this is actually, it looks hard, but it's actually quite easy to read. And you will get an idea of why it is the way it is. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in there, a bit of extra reading or learning if you're interested in kind of digging a bit deeper on that. Okay, so let's bring up the web page. What we did in the last couple of sessions was write the algorithm that should be expanding each of these photos to the edge of the gallery here. So I've made the edge of the gallery be this green line here. Normally, in a real production setting, in a real production front end, the edge of the gallery should probably be the edge of the screen here. But just so we can see it, I've lined it up against somewhere, in a bit further, just so it's really easy to see kind of when photos are like overlapping it or whatever. The problem here, I think it's just a visual problem. So we're just in the gallery component here. And it looks pretty obvious because you can see here that I've hard-coded effectively the height of each row to the target row height, which is a hard-coded variable here. That is something later on I want to be a prop to the gallery component. It's not at the moment. We haven't really got that far yet as to make this thing usable as a component. We're still just working on the layout algorithm, which is what happens in create layout here. So in create layout here, I think from memory, it was like last week. So I'm trying to remember where I got to, but create layout should compute a height for each row, and I should be plugging that height in here. So I should be saying the row dot height. We're customizing the height of each row per item, and you can see the row is here. We're mapping over the list of rows, and the rows is what is computed from the layout algorithm here. So I've saved that, and it's not really made much difference. I guess I better check the console here in the dev tools, and there's no errors. So something else is going wrong. I've missed something in my layout algorithm. We are recomputing the height of each item, but that's not what we're interested in here. We're interested in the row height. And I think I've just missed that out completely. For each row, or for the first row at least, we're plugging in the target row height. That's in our test case, that's 200 pixels. And then for every other row, we're plugging in the row height of 200 pixels. But we're not changing that anywhere. So we've effectively hard-coded our gallery here to 200 pixel height rows. Even though we are correctly computing the expanded width and height of each item here, or that's recomputing it to fit the target row height, and then down here in this loop here, we are expanding out each item to cover the width, to cover this gap down the right-hand side here. So that looks good, but it's just the row height that we're missing. Somewhere here, probably just here, we need to update the row height. Now, how are we going to do that? Because each item could potentially have a different height. I either want to kind of max it at, or make it the maximum height of all the items, or the minimum height of all the items. I think if it's the minimum height, I think it's basically we're going to be reducing the size of each item, which means it's still not going to fully line up with the right-hand edge here. If we make it the maximum height, some of the items will be probably too big, and it'll probably overlap the edge of the gallery here. But that could work, I think. I want to see what that looks like. I prefer to have it overlap than kind of underlap, if that makes sense. I might actually, rather than doing TDD, I might just take a couple of steps beyond TDD and just see if this is actually going to work. And then I'll come back and I'll TDD this. I'm feeling my way forward here. I'm feeling my way forward in little steps. Let's start by setting, not the min. Let's go with the max. Let's go with the maximum because we want it to overlap. Maximum thumb height. Let's just start with 0, and we'll expand this as we encounter each item. Let's record this down here. So let's get the maximum of that, and whatever the current item height is. And then we'll use that as the row height. I'm just going to see visually whether this even works. Well, not really. That had a really wacky effect, didn't it? What am I doing wrong here? I might just console log that and see what it actually comes up with per row. So we'll have a look at what comes up in our dev tools. It's really weird. So that's like really big. That's way too big. Question is, how do I make this more visual? When you make something like this be sort of more visual, you can see the errors more clearly. Okay, let's do some debugging. Now I could go looking for the code in DevTools there, but an easy way to get into debugging in JavaScript is to use the debugger keyword, right? So I'll save that. Now it's automatically hit that breakpoint there, so I can see where I am in my code and hopefully get an idea of what's going on here. I don't normally have to resort to debugging. It is a really good technique to understand what your code is doing. And in fact, when I was a much younger developer, I used to do a lot. I used to debug every line of code that I wrote to understand how it worked. So this is a really valuable tool for understanding how your code works. I don't use it as much as I used to, though. Oh, another thing that will be helpful here, actually, in debugging, let me just do that, is to cut down the data that we're working with. So I might say, I don't want to work with the full gallery. There's just too much to look at there. So let's take a slice of the gallery. Will that work? 3 items. I'm just gonna remove that debugger keyword just for a moment, just so I can make sure that my change just worked. Oh yeah, so I've got 3 items. Oh, and I really need some more items than that because I need them to overflow into the next row. That's the thing. So let's say double that, 6 items. Oh, probably too many. Can we get away with 5 items? Yep. We can't get away with 4. So one thing we could do as well is we could make the target row height smaller, and that would allow us to work with less items. But I think this is okay. I think this is going to be workable. I'll enable my debugger keyword there again, and I'm going to start debugging this. I don't think I'm too interested in that bit there. So I can set breakpoints now wherever I want. And I'll just continue to that point. So I'm onto the actual algorithm here where it's expanding the items. Not really interested in that bit there. I might just stop here and see what's what. So the height is 200 as we expected. The width was rescaled to accommodate that. We are adding delta width of 13 pixels here, or thereabouts. So the new height, why is it shrinking the height? Have I got this? I bet anything that I've got something wrong in the maths here. So I think I've got something wrong with this calculation here, and I'm just going to fiddle with that for a bit. I think I've got a suspicion I know what it is, but let me just try it. Let me just try it and see. Okay, let's get back to the actual code here. Computing aspect ratio always seems to get me. I bet I've just got. Let's get rid of that debugger keyword. Let's get rid of that debugger keyword. Hopefully I won't have to debug this. So I've just changed the division here to multiplication. I just suspect that's the... Oh, that's looking better. That's looking better. So, wow, look. Funny little bug here. You know, funny little bug in the code that's been there since last session. Didn't notice it until just now. Let's get rid of this gallery slice here. We'll get our full gallery back. So that looks good. Like that's pretty close to done, I think. I just got to write a test. I've sort of prototyped a little bit ahead here to kind of update the height of each row. But I didn't do test-driven development. I needed to feel my way ahead to find out what the next step was. And the question now is how do I test this? So back to my tests. I just want to know that the height is coming out correctly, right? Well, not even that. Like, let's comment this out. Let's try and do this via TDD. Where pretend that I didn't do that. We'll bring that back into play in a moment. So TDD says that you should kind of have a failing test before you write the code that may succeed. And I think to do that, I can just put some extra expectations at the end of one of my existing tests. So what I'm looking to do here is I want to know if something to do with the first row, right? The height of the first row to be, let's say greater than, because we're expecting this to be scaled up so the images fit. So if that is greater than the target row height, I think we've got a win. And the second row should not be scaled at all because we said that the final row in each gallery is not going to be scaled at all. So that's the second row here. I should put that expectation just there. So the height should be, we'll use this close to function again. It should be close to the target row height. So it shouldn't be changed, is what I'm saying. Now that should give me, hopefully, a failing test. Let's go back to where our tests are. I'm just going to run these tests in live reload mode now, or watch mode, as Jest calls it. So I've got my failing test there. That's what I expected. That's what I hoped. Now I've got to make that pass. Hopefully I can just enable the code that I've already written here and make that test pass. Cool. We've got passing tests and we've got a nice looking visual gallery as well. Is there anything else that I need to do before I wrap up today? Oh, one thing that I wanted to do here, actually I'm going to commit that. So I mean, this is a good place to do a commit. So I'll check what I've done. So git diff is just a great way to do a self-review, check the changes that you've made here, and understand the changes that you've made as well, and understand what you're committing. I just think it's very important. So this is where I changed, you see, from the division to the multiplication. So just an error in the mathematics, that was it. That was all that problem was. Updates to our tests. I think we're all good there. Let's commit this. What should the name of this commit be? Really just fixed layout issues for the visual gallery. Now there's one other thing I wanted to look at here, and that was this little bit of code here that we left over from last session where it's recomputing this. It's recomputing this row width here, and it's a little, potentially a performance issue in a large gallery where it's recomputing that for each kind of row in the gallery. And I'm already computing that. I'm pretty sure I'm already computing that back here. Yeah, so I'm already computing current row width. I'm adding to that in the first loop. I'm setting that up in the first loop. So what I want to do is get rid of this. And pull that out. This doesn't exist yet. So this could result in a broken test. So we're pulling the row width out of the row. I hope it results in a broken test. Yeah, so that's good. It's good. Like when you change your code and it's properly tested using automated tests, and you change something that's important, ideally, ultimately, if you change anything, a test should break. But sometimes you don't have complete test coverage, so it may not break, and this may be a trigger for you to go and write more tests. But it did what I wanted. It broke a test because I have not added the width to each row yet, and that's something I've got to do in the previous loop back here, possibly here where I'm setting up the original row. I can start off with a width of 0. In fact, the current width, if I just reference that in the current row, and I can get rid of this, so I'll just, wherever I find this current width, I'm basically just going to move that into the row. So just a little bit of a refactor here for performance, really. That's why I'm doing this. Whenever you do a refactor, you should have a good reason for it. You shouldn't just do it to make the code look prettier or something like that. And always test it. Always test whatever you're refactoring. TypeScript is really good for this sort of stuff because TypeScript, when you compile your code, it's automatically going to pick up these changes. But here I'm just searching for current row width, which is the thing that I'm changing to be from its own variable to be the width on the current row. I've got another one down here. Now, hopefully that will make my test pass and my code will be slightly better performance because of that. Let's see what the tests say anyway. It's always good to try and predict what's going to happen with the tests. You write some code, predict whether a test is going to fail or succeed. Sometimes you will be wrong in your prediction, and that's a useful learning experience. And you can never trust yourself anyway. You can never trust yourself with this stuff. Trust your tests. Trust what your computer says. But I've got passing tests there, so I'm going to do a commit here. Just check what I changed and check that I'm happy with it. Yep. So I've taken this current row width and I've actually pushed that into each row. That looks good. Yep. So what I'm searching for here is I'm just preemptively searching for bugs that I might be adding to the code. You'd be surprised at how many embarrassing issues just a little bit of self-review will catch for you that you don't have to then inflict on your teammates. So what am I doing here? So small refactor to cache the pre-computed row width performance. So there's more I would like to do, but I think that's a good session. I think that's a good place to wrap up the session. I'll just leave by running my tests and making sure that they still work. So that looks good. I'll run the web page again just to double check that it's good. Well, so I'm pretty happy with that. There's a few things I'd like to do to clean up this gallery component, but I might do that in the next session. when I start actual front-end development. So I do want to kind of add some of these. Some of these things need to be passed in as props, basically. So this target row height, that shouldn't be hard-coded. That should be passed in. This gallery width, ultimately, that needs to come from the actual width of the gallery. And we'll figure out how to do that, I think, in the next session. And there's some of the things that need to be done to make this into kind of a fully kind of reusable gallery component. And it's not really even that it needs to be reused. I don't want to reuse this. I'm not making an effort to make this thing reusable. It's just going to be used in Photosphere. I don't have any plans to publish this as like a separate package. Maybe if people want that, I'll do that, but I don't have any plans to do that. All I want to know is that I want to be able to externally change this row height so I can have the user of the photo gallery configure what they want the row height to be. So that'll be like some sort of slider in the final front end. And then, of course, the gallery width has to be configurable to the size of the screen. So when you take this gallery, and you kind of resize it like that, I want the gallery to go all the way to the edge of the screen. So that's what's going to be coming up next. If you watch the last 3 sessions of test-driven development and all the backwards and forwards and issues that I had to work through, you might think, is it worth it? Is it really worth doing test-driven development? What you really have to ask yourself is my code worth that investment, worth that time? And so for code that's changing frequently, or code that needs to be really reliable or secure, it's definitely worth having automated tests around it. It's less clear whether test-driven development is worth it, because test-driven development is, an investment again. For code that's evolving and code that's changing quickly, like test-driven development can be a real, it can really slow down your development process actually, because you're constantly getting tests working again, refactoring your code, getting tests working again. That's great for production code. But if you're in that exploratory phase of coding, like prototyping, you probably don't want to use test-driven development. And you'll see that, before I started test-driven development in the last 3 sessions, I did multiple sessions of prototyping to figure out how to do things, to answer questions that I had, to learn how feasible this was going to be. So I did all that before test-driven development. And the reason I did test-driven development was because I wanted to show you how to do it, and I wanted to include it in my book, Rapid Fullstack Development, but also because I wanted to make sure there was, good coverage of automated tests on this photo gallery layout algorithm. And the reason for that is because it's like the most important bit of code in Photosphere. It's the most important bit of code. It's the front end, the main way that users will interact with Photosphere is through this photo gallery. And so I wanted the code to be, really reliable and to have automated testing around it to always prove that it was working. No matter what changes I make to this, I can always prove that it's working according to the tests that I put in place. Now, test-driven development, automated testing doesn't catch every issue. As you will have seen, I've had multiple issues already. We're caught visually, and this is a very visual problem. Like game development, which I used to do, this is a very visual problem, and a lot of the issues are found visually rather than through automated tests. So you can't get away. You can't really get away without doing that visual testing, and it all adds up. So test-driven development, automated testing, visual testing, it all adds up to a really solid code base and a really solid project. So that's it for today's session. Hope you enjoyed it. We've wrapped up test-driven development for this part of the application development. I'm going to be back in the next session in 48 hours, and we're actually going to be starting to develop the actual front end for Photosphere. So this has been a while coming. We've taken a lot of steps to get to this point, but at this point, I'm really confident that we're going to build a really strong, really usable, really reliable front end. And so we're going to start in the next session by bringing in the layout algorithm that we've been building using test-driven development. And we're going to actually render the proper gallery. We're going to add React Router so that we can change to an upload page. And then we're going to connect all this to the back end that we seems like eons ago that I actually did the live streams coding the back end. We're going to connect the front end to the back end and be able to upload photos and then view the photos that we uploaded in the gallery. So please join me again, 48 hours. We're going to be developing the Photosphere front end. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.